Detroit Lions head coach Dan Campbell is known as a straightforward, no-nonsense kind of guy, but in a recent interview it would be very easy to say that Dan Campbell gave the reporters a much more straightforward answer than what they were expecting. We're going to talk about it in today's episode, folks, so stay tuned.
We used to be a team no one respected. We used to be a team no one feared. That was then. This is now.
First victory of the year on the line. Goff's got it. Back, looks, throws, end zone. Yes! Caught!
You know who we are.
10-5, end zone, touchdown Detroit Lions!
And you know where to find us. We won't be far. We'll be on your front porch waiting for you. We are the New Era Lions. And
we are driven by Detroit.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host David T. Pike, and as always, we're diving in. But before we dive in, I just want to say to everybody that's coming back to my show, thank you all for your view, thank you all for your support and your patience, thank you all for being loyal subscribers and loyal viewers. It absolutely means the world to me that I have such loyal fans, and I'm thankful and appreciative for every single one of y'all. And to those that are tuning into my show for the very first time, I just want to say thank you all for tuning into the show, thank you all for giving it a shot. I hope y'all enjoy it, but even more so, I hope to gain you all subscribers if I've earned and deserved it and you like the content. And with that being said to everybody, I just want to say God bless. I hope you all having a great day. And with that, let's dive into the content. So, here's the thing, folks. The NFL world over the last couple of days has literally been turned on its ear. It's been turned upside down. It's literally had to do a 180. Like, everybody and their brother is talking about the exact same thing in some facet or another. And what has been primarily, capturing the waves of news articles and, news podcasts and everything else has been about the Lions-Cowboys primetime fiasco with the whole illegal touching on the two-point conversion. I'm not necessarily going to talk about that today in the most direct sense. But what I am going to talk about is something that relates to it that has to do directly with Dan Campbell. Now, why am I talking about this in the abstract view that I'm going to? Well, let's understand something here. When it comes to people that have had this conversation, I would say a supremely large majority of people, most people have come out in support of the Lions, have come out in support of the players and support of the coaches, stating that in their honest opinion, the NFL and head referee Brad Allen were the ones that got it wrong. They screwed it up. They screwed the Lions over. That has been typically the response that has come from the majority of analysts, majority of coaches, majority of players, majority of fans. However, though, not to say that everybody has, but there are some people that have agreed either that Campbell was either too aggressive in his play calling towards the end of the game, or as the NFL has now been rumored, has now been reported to be doing, is saying that the Lions were trying to be deceptive with the refs. I recently made a video talking about that. I'll put the link to that episode back up at the top. But here's what I'm going to say to kind of get past all that nonsense so we can get into this topic. Regardless of what anyone believes, the fact of the matter is that the NFL has got an officiating crisis. And let's just be blunt about this. This is a crisis that has been going on for years. The problem is, though, is that it's only gotten worse and worse and worse as time has gone by, despite the affirmations, despite the continued support from NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell that there's nothing wrong with the officiating. That in fact the official crews are actually getting better and better. I think if I recall correctly, he said earlier this year that the NFL officiating is the best it's ever been, and it's like, really? You're gonna really try and sell that one to fans? Ain't nobody gonna be buying that fool's gold. But the point of the matter is that the officiating crews, they're just not meeting the par that is expected with NFL-style games. That's not to say that all NFL crews are bad, but there's a much more highly prevalent problem about the fact that NFL crews and referees are missing calls or getting calls wrong that is causing problems with games and is ultimately leading to different outcomes which can have a huge impact upon how the NFL performs and how teams get in and out of the playoffs. Case in point. But when we talk about this whole thing, it would appear that while fans like myself, certain reporters, analysts that are in the TV business, analysts that are associated with the NFL, and even the NFL to a certain degree, while they're wanting to keep talking about the incident, There's one particular person that has quite frankly had enough talking about it, and that is Dan Campbell. And here's the reason I can say this, because within the last 2 days, Dan Campbell has probably fielded more questions that have been related to this whole incident than probably any one individual would probably ever want to have. But regardless of that, Dan Campbell has fielded them all, and he has been about as straightforward as a human being can be. Case in point, if we go back to Monday, Dan Campbell in his media session with the reporters at the Detroit Lions facility had a whole bunch of questions that were related around, hey, what was the process? What was up with the play calling? What was your decision making? Blah, 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 blah. And the point of the matter is that if you go back and you rewatch that entire media session, it was very plainly obvious, it was very clearly obvious that Dan Campbell simply did not want to continue to rehash the controversial play and everything that was associated with it. In fact, there were several times that Dan Campbell was like, listen, I don't want to get into this. He specifically said he wasn't going to get into it, and that for the most part, unless the reporters kept bringing it up, he was over it. So pretty much what Campbell was saying is like, listen, I've already made my peace with it for the most part. I don't want to get back into it. I just want to move the hell on, and I want to get ready to prepare for the Vikings and then get ready for the playoffs. That was what Dan Campbell was in essence saying to the reporters in the Detroit Lions media session. However, though, again, sometimes there are certain people that just don't know when to let a good thing go. And at that point, it should have been let go because it's like, listen, nobody else is probably going to want to ask any more questions because Dan Campbell has almost made it abundantly clear he's done and over the whole situation. However, though, in an interview with 97.1 The Ticket with Jim Costa and Mike Stone, Campbell was once again pressed about the process about the end of the game, specifically surrounding the two-point conversion play. However, though, rather than surrounding about, okay, what was going on with the refs, all that nonsense, he was specifically being pressed about his aggressive play calling, and actually Campbell was kind of being put on the spot and actually was being put on the defensive side of things because of the fact that the interviewers, Jim Costa specifically, did not agree with Dan Campbell's process. And so we're going to talk about that here really quickly. So when we go into the interview, there's really just about a part of the interview that really kind of is applicable to this whole conversation, but we'll talk about it all the same. So what we have here is Jim Costa, he's talking to Dan Campbell. And what happens here is Costa's talking with him and he's asking the whole process. And there was a specific part here where Costa was asking Campbell about the decision to go for two. And so I'm going to show a screenshot of this from the article that I found it for, and I'm going to read verbatim what Dan Campbell said. This is what Campbell said. He said, I told our offense we were going to go for the win. We're going to go down, we're going to score, and we're going to go for two, and I wasn't coming off that. So pretty much what Dan Campbell is telling Jim Costa is that, listen, even before they even got to the two-point conversion point, they had already made the decision. We're going down, we're scoring, and we're going for two. We're not even going to try and play this game of, oh, are we going for one, are we going for two? No, we're scoring, we're going to go for two. We're not even going to play that game. Now, most people would probably like to have asked, well, you know, would Dan Campbell have considered going for one in a certain situation? And Campbell did state in the interview that had the Lions been pushed outside of the 10-yard line, that they probably would have gone for the extra point rather than going for two. But since that never came into being, it never was a question for the Lions. Pretty much they were like, listen, we're going for two, we're going for the win, which is exactly what most Lions fans were expecting when we got down there, because that's just what Dan Campbell does. He's aggressive, he's going to take gambles, and you know what? That's kind of how it works with him. That's why he's called Dan Gamblin' Campbell, pardon me. And it's just like, listen, that's what Dan Campbell does. He's going to be aggressive, he's not going to apologize for it. That's what he does. But again, however, Jim Costa kept pushing the matter with Dan Campbell until finally Campbell just had enough. He pretty much what he did is he kind of turned the tables on Jim Costa, and what he did is he put him on the spot. Now, for this, I'm not actually going to read the transcript. I've actually got an audio recording of this, so I'm actually right now going to insert the audio recording so that way you guys can hear it. Here it is.
You got the penalty and moved it to
Go ahead and say it. Say it. Both of you.
What?
Say it. Say what you want to say.
I think from the 7, it's a low percentage play. I think your chances of winning are lower than if you kick the extra point.
Say it like you would say it to anybody else. I'm on the radio. Say it like you want to say it.
Yeah. I thought it was a reckless decision.
Thank you.
Now, some people might think that Campbell's response there might either have been rude or arrogant, but here's what I'm going to say. I simply look at it as how Campbell has always been. Let's just be fair and honest here. Take a look at how Costa was actually pointing the question towards Dan Campbell. What Costa was kind of looking for is he was dancing around the whole situation without actually getting to the heart of the matter. Well, if there's one thing we know about Dan Campbell is he does not play around. He does not play games. He goes straight to the whole point of the matter. He is very straightforward. He's truthful, direct, convicted in his approach. He's open. That has always been Dan Campbell since day one of the Detroit Lions, and that I don't think is ever going to change. And quite frankly, I don't ever want it to change because after what we've had with coaches in the past, a.k.a. Matt Patricia, I don't want coaches that are not direct, that are not open, that are not straightforward. This is a fresher breath air that has been very, very good, in my opinion, for the Lions. So in my honest opinion, what Campbell was trying to do was to get Jim Costa off of this fence-sitting situation and stop dancing around with these questions, with 21 questions, and just simply say, listen, I know what you guys are going for here. I know that you guys had a problem with my play calling. You guys had a problem with my decision-making process. I just want you to say it so we can get it out in the open, so we can move the hell off of the conversation as an entire, NFL organization, so that way everybody can stop asking me this dumb question and any questions that are associated with it, but also so that way Campbell could move on with the interview, because it was quite obvious, as I was saying, and probably from what Campbell was understanding during the interview, these guys did not agree with what Campbell did, and what they were trying to do was to try and find a way to, one, not appear to be rude to Campbell, but at the same time, trying to find a way to get that conversation open. And Campbell was like, listen, just come right out and say it. We're adults here. You've had me on the radio. Just go ahead and say it like anybody else you would do. Just because I'm the head coach of the Lions doesn't mean I'm special. Come right out and say it, and let's get it over with. Let's get it out in the open. And for me, I appreciate that about Campbell. He's not going to play around. It's like, listen, don't treat me any different than you would anybody else. Let's just get it out in the open so that way we can move the hell on. There's nothing wrong with being direct with people. It's like, listen, so long as you're respectful about the situation, be direct. And again, that is what Dan Campbell was saying to Jim Costa and Mike Stone of 97.1 The Ticket. But the real question here is, now that we've kind of talked about this whole thing, is do you agree with Campbell's decision personally to go for the win with the 2-point conversion, or do you think he should have just said, you know what, screw it, we're going to go for the try, we're going to go for the extra point, and we're going to go to overtime? Here's what I'm going to say before I kind of wrap this whole episode up. I'm going to say this about Dan Campbell. Again, while I have no problem with Dan Campbell's aggressive nature, because I'm going to say this right now, Dan Campbell's aggressive nature has really helped out the Lions in a lot of ways, because it's like, listen, they're a never-say-die team. They're never going to quit. They're always going to try and find a way to win. Which for me, having watched the Lions for as long as I have, I can say this with absolute conviction, and a lot of other Lions fans will back me up on this. There were a lot of times when it looked like the Lions would be at points during the game, and they'd already checked out mentally. They had already accepted defeat. They were not going to try anymore. It was just like, well, we're just waiting for 0-0-0 on the clock, so that way we can go home and put our stuff in the locker room, and that's it. That's not the way Dan Campbell does business. He is always going to try, and his teams are always going to try. They are never just going to accept defeat and say, well, that's the end of it. So for me, I am never, ever, ever going to fault Dan Campbell for trying to go for a win, and I'm never going to fault him for being aggressive. However, though, there is a point where it's like, listen, you can be aggressive, and I do like the fact that Dan Campbell is aggressive. But sometimes, like I said in the previous episode, I'll put that episode also back up at the top, there has to come a point where you have to learn where to temper it. You have to learn, okay, is this really the right point to be aggressive, or should we rather just take the conservative approach, the safe approach, to live to fight another down, another day, whatever the case might be? And what I'm specifically referring to in this situation is with the 2-point conversion. Okay, the first 2-point conversion, right, wrong, indifferent, I don't want to get back into that whole nonsense, being overturned by Brad Allen. Okay, that's out the door. You can't change that. The NFL's already moved on it. Now you're on to the next 2-point conversion. Okay, maybe you go for a second attempt, see what you can get. But then the Lions got another break because there was a penalty that took the play back after it had failed to convert that time, because if I recall correctly, Micah Parsons got called for offsides or something like that. After 2 failed conversions, one because of a penalty on your team, and then one because you failed it, and then you got another chance because the defense got a penalty, I would have said, okay, screw this. Let's kick the field goal. Let's go to overtime. And here's the reason why. Again, like I said in that episode that I just referenced a few moments ago, take a look at what Aaron Glenn's defense had done for the majority of that game. For the majority of that game, it had done a really good job of keeping the Cowboys out of the end zone. Think about it. The Cowboys only scored 2 touchdowns the entire day. And that was literally on 2 plays that Dak Prescott threw. One was on a broken play where Derek Barnes missed a sack that would have resulted in a safety and freaking threw the ball down the field for a 92-yard touchdown to CeeDee Lamb after our guy tripped over his own 2 feet. The other one was an actually good passing touchdown in the corner of the end zone to Brandon Cooks. So it's like, listen, you held a team that at home up to that point had been scoring on average 40 points a game, and the defense had been doing a really good job of holding the Cowboys' offense in check. And you still have the chance of saying, okay, we go to the coin toss, we have a 50-50 shot of whatever way the coin flips. We could get the ball first, drive down the field just like we had done the previous drive, and then you can win the game right then and there. That, to me, seems like a very logical, it seems to me like a very good approach rather than risking everything on one play. Because again, as I said in that episode, let's just say hypothetically that you do to get that 2-point conversion play, you give the ball back to Dallas, they have about 20 or so seconds to drive down the field. They still also have 1 timeout. So to me it's like, okay, now at that point, you're giving Dallas about 20 seconds plus 1 timeout to drive down the field to get within field goal range with a kicker that has a cannon for a leg. For me, it's like, I would much rather take my odds and say, you know what, kick the ball off, have us go to overtime, and see who gets the better options once we get to overtime, because at that point, you're on a much more level playing field. And at least at that point, it's not sudden death unless the Cowboys drive all the way down the field and they get the touchdown to start off their first drive, because that's the only way it ends in sudden death now. You have to score a touchdown first and foremost. That's the only way it ends. But for me, that to me makes a lot more sense. That to me would have made a lot more sense than trying 3 straight 2-point conversions. But again, that's just my personal opinion. Like I said, I have no fault with Dan Campbell going for the win. But it's like, listen, after the first 2 tries, it should have been plainly obvious the Cowboys were pretty much expecting what the Lions were going to do. Hell, even if you go back into that interview, Dan Campbell talked about on the 3rd 2-point conversion try. And again, I'll put it up there on the screen. I don't have it memorized verbatim, but pretty much what Campbell said is that play that Goff threw to freaking James Mitchell was not the look. In fact, if I recall correctly, he said he was the last look on the play. That play was never designed for James Mitchell. And the reason why it went to him was because the Cowboys gave them the exact coverage that does not work with that play. So pretty much Goff only had one option, which was James Mitchell, which means he had to go all the way from one side of the field to the other, which is part of the reason why the play failed. So again, that's just how it kind of works. You live and you die by the gamble. You live and die by how Dan Campbell's going to be aggressive. Are there times where it drives Lions fans crazy? Absolutely. But at the same time, it's like, listen, I would much rather have a coach that is going to give us a chance to win every freaking week rather than the times of the past where Lions coaches and Lions players just pretty much threw their hands up in the air and said, we're done. We're not going to try anymore. We already know the game's lost. No game's ever out of reach with Dan Campbell as the head coach. No game is ever safe with Dan Campbell as the head coach because it's like, listen, you can be up by 30 or you can only be up by 1. He is still going to come after you with the same tenacity and the same aggressiveness. And for me, that's one thing I do love about Dan Campbell. It might be something that drives me crazy at times, but it's like, listen, I would much rather have Campbell's approach than other head coaches of the past that pretty much just said, we're not going to make it. Let's just get out of here with our heads held high and nobody gets hurt and we go to the locker room and collect our paychecks. That's my whole point. But again, when you take a look at this interview, pretty much Dan Campbell is pretty much telling the rest of the NFL and everybody else, I'm done talking about the 2-point conversion fail. I'm done talking about the rule. I'm done talking about the formation. I'm done talking about the refs. What happened? What didn't happen? C'est la vie. And as such, so am I. This is the last time I'm talking about that whole situation. Moving on to a different topic. But with that having been said, I just want to say thank you all for watching another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage you all to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Please, 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 if you subscribed in the past and got to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and not had a chance to do so, please make sure you subscribe, but also hit that bell notification icon as well. I also encourage you all in that endeavor to please share this content with your Lions friends and family members. Share it here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere you can with everybody and anybody that you can. So that way we can continue to grow the the channel and help it spread. And with that being said, I just want to again say thank you to all that watch the content. Hopefully you guys all liked it. Hopefully I gained new subscribers. If I still haven't gained your subscription, please come back and hopefully I'll get another chance to do so. But with that being said, I just want to again say to everybody, God bless. Hope you all enjoyed the show. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.